إن الحمد لله ثم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستهديه وعليه نتوكل ونتوب إليه ونعوذ به من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فهو المهتد ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله وخطب الأنبياء وإمام المرسلين فصلوات الله تعالى عليه وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. I want to change gears a little bit today from last week. We discussed a number of things in terms of, personal rectification, but I want to talk a little bit today about what community are we trying to create? Because we talk a lot about our personal relationship with Allah Ta'ala, which of course is extremely important, but the reality is even our individual relationship with Allah Ta'ala is going to take place in a community, right? I mean, even here where today we're together, that there is such a thing called the Muslim community, the Ummah, the Jumu'ah, whatever word you want to use. And therefore we need to really actively think about what kind of community do we want to create, because groups, whatever group they have ideologies, they have things they claim to be true, and they have psychologies, right, that will influence our behavior. And as we can see, like sometimes when you go into our spaces, many people today, they lament about, well, look at the numbers are lower, and less people are coming to the masajid, and so on and so on. And we have to ask ourselves, well then, if that is the case, how and why did we get to this? And how might we make some changes to make that better? And one of them, I want to talk about, one particular issue I want to talk about today is that we increasingly have forgotten the distinction that essentially Allah has classified, there's two kinds of people. There's mu'min and kafir. But within the mu'min, there's essentially three kinds. There's the believer, right? And then there's the sinner, and then there's the munafiq. And what has happened today, increasingly, I've found, is that we have done away with the idea of a believer who sins, and we've either made some perfect model that nobody can attain, which is like a saint that doesn't make any sins at all, or if a person commits a sin, they're automatically considered to be a munafiq. They're considered to be a hypocrite. And the issue with this mentality is that it actually collapses reality from a three-dimensional space into a two-dimensional space. Now this might sound like Star Trek or science fiction, but follow along with me. This reality, this haqiqah that Allah Ta'ala has created, has three dimensions to it. It has height, width, and depth. And we live in that space. That's how we have air to breathe and so on. And we experience this reality in three dimensions. And therefore, if there's going to be a believer, we should really look at this, the good believer, the sinful believer, and it's true, there is a hypocrite. And in fact, the Prophet ﷺ said, وَآيَةُ الْمُنَافِقِ ثَلَاث, that there are three signs of a hypocrite. And we don't necessarily need to go into the great detail about that today, because this isn't really just about, nifaq or hypocrisy, but it's about the danger of creating an environment in which there are only perfect people, or complete, the opposite of not even just sinful, but the complete opposite, which is what? They are essentially people of betrayal. Because amongst those qualities that he did, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, describe for the munafiq, he said what? إِذَا حَدَّثَ كَذَّبَ. Right? When he speaks, he lies. Right? And if he is, if he's either وَعَدَ أَخْلَفَ, right? When he promises, he breaks it, and so on and so on, right? We need to go back to an understanding that just because a person is a believer, that they profess belief in La ilaha illallah, that there's no God but God, no God but Allah, wa Muhammad abduhu wa rasuluhu, that Muhammad is the final messenger, that somehow that equates that they will never make a sin. Least of all, I know for myself that's not true. But I have seen this increasing tendency among some in the community to make this very false two-dimensional space. And the real, I guess you could say, victims of this mentality have actually been the younger generation. Because they say, well, either I have to be a wali, I have to be like some person who is, perceived to be some saint, or if I do anything wrong, I'm perceived to be a hypocrite. But it also coaches them into seeing or viewing the world through this perspective as well. And therefore, just to be blunt, right, we see certain public figures that we hold in very high esteem, and they commit a sin, and now what happens? We say, oh, this person is a munafiq. So you take, for instance, Tariq Ramadan. We all know this case that's going against him. Personally, I don't know about all of the evidence, but clearly, even what he did was no doubt sinful. But I heard people immediately jumping, oh my God, what a hypocrite. He's up there on stage preaching about Islam night and day, and then look what happens behind closed doors. Okay, undoubtedly, what he did was a mistake and a sin. We can even say, forget about mistake, it was a sin, no doubt. But if we immediately jump to the conclusion this person was hypocritical, meaning that everything that they did other than that sin was all for personal gain, it was all a show, it could not have been sincere. The problem is this, again, we collapse reality into this two-dimension. This is not how people live. Even to, newsflash, or I hope I'm not crumbling your reality for you, but even people that you perceive to be in positions of esteem, they are human beings. They are human beings, they have flaws, and therefore this really illustrates the one major problem, right? One bullet point, we're putting faith in people and not faith in God. We're putting our faith in created things versus in the Creator. And undoubtedly, if this happens, then we feel this like almost as if the system itself has failed. One commentator said this is the failure of political Islam today to try to establish a so-called Islamic state. I'm not talking about Daesh, but I'm talking about the idea of creating some sort of like Dawla Islamiyya. And one of the problems he said is that if the state fails, right, whether due to corruption, inept, or whatever, they gave it their best shot, if it fails and it has the label of being an Islamic state, the people themselves will say, look, Islam failed. So if you see your leaders as anbiya versus just leaders that, maybe they have a particular skill set or they're a scholar or, but they make a mistake. And this is not about holding people to account. We do. They have to face justice. But what I'm going to get to in a minute here is we have to not create a psychological space in which there is no hope for redemption. This should be one of the tangible, very, very tangible psychological, you could say, things that rub off on a person when they come into the Muslim community. There's always a shot at redemption. It doesn't mean you won't face justice for what crimes or sins that you commit. You will. But it should never come at the expense of the hope of redemption. And therefore, Allah Ta'ala says in Surah Al-Baqarah, He says, إِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ. Right? And when my slaves ask you, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, about me, tell them what? إِنِّي قَرِيبٌ. I am close. I am close to you. Now, what is the purpose of having God close to you? Is it just that, it's like having somebody rich that you always hang around with that you can bum $5 off or $20 off of? Is this the idea that the only purpose or utility of being close to God is that it's like an ATM or like Santa Claus, we just get what we want? Or is there something more profound that the human being is in need of in being close to God, which is what? Redemption, maghfirah, right? Making tawbah, making repentance. And this is something that we need to really imbue between each other and treat each other with the Spirit, so that people feel that no matter what they have done, not that they won't face justice. We should be qawwamuna bil qist, right? We should be the people who stand and are upright for justice. But justice from the Islamic point of view, from the Quranic point of view, from the Muhammadan point of view, is always with another shot at redemption, of Allah forgiving you, and at the very least, if perhaps the very most, you have a shot at an afterlife, an eternity that is good. Even, let's say, you kill somebody in this life, and you have to face the justice for that, and perhaps the system determines you, maybe capital punishment. You have to be put to death. Or you will spend the rest of your life in jail. Maybe that is the earthly punishment for that. But that should not come at the consequence that even a person that's on death row, or even a person that is going to spend the rest of their life in jail, understand that, you know what, this isn't the end, and because you didn't get it here, you don't get it at all. No, you should still have a sense of tawbah, ask Allah for repentance. I mean, I'm giving you an extreme example, but that you have another shot in the hereafter. And that, I think, if we can create that space, will really convey, what is it like to be in the Muslim community? أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ دَاعِ إِذَا دَعَانِ, right? That I respond to the caller when he calls. This is Allah Ta'ala saying to the Prophet, say to them, tell them, this is my nature, this is who I am close to you, and I respond to those that call upon me. Now again, doesn't mean I give you what you asked for, but I respond. As we said before, the disposition of Zachariah alayhi salam, of Zachary, was what? I was never shaqiyyan. I was never displeased with calling upon you. This is really fundamental to creating what it means to live a life as a Muslim, not a moment as a Muslim. Because a good deed is a moment and a bad deed is a moment. But what happens when you got to get through 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years of moments? If you become trapped in a moment, right? You become trapped in a bad deed, man, perhaps you will just waste your whole entire life. Well, it's not really worth doing any redemption. There's no point. Or I shouldn't even try because these people that I have perceived to be perfect people wound up not being perfect. So they're a bunch of hypocrites, therefore this whole thing is a bunch of nonsense. We have to be really careful about what we are putting our faith in, but likewise we also have to have the courage to contribute. We have to have the courage to contribute to making this community better. I've traveled around the world and within the Muslim world, and a lot of us love to go and rant and rave about the king here and the ruler there and how they're brutalizing and oppressing the people, and some of that is very true. But why is it from the moment I step off the airplane and I'm dealing with the taxi cab driver, or I'm dealing with the concierge, or I go to the market, I'm constantly being cheated, robbed, and I gotta bribe everybody under the sun just to get something done? That's not the ruler telling you to do that. That has become a culture for us in our so-called Muslim lands, right? لا يغير الله بقوم حتى يغيروا بأنفسهم. Allah is not going to change the condition of a people till what? They change themselves. That means we have to have a spirit of contributing. فَلْيَسْجُدِيبُوا لِي وَلِيُؤْمِنُوا بِي. Right? So Allah Ta'ala says what? Call upon me then and have faith. Believe in me. This is people are only going to feel inclined to call. Right? If I feel that you are the representation of everything that is true and false, and you wind up being false, or you make a mistake, well then I'm probably not going to be inclined to call upon God, because I've in fact been putting all my faith in you. But if I believe in Allah and I see a person I hold in esteem make a mistake, I can contextualize, okay, this is a person that even the Prophet ﷺ said, وَأَنَا بَشَرٌ مِثْلُكُمْ, I'm a man just like the rest of you. So if the Prophet ﷺ, who had isma, who was protected divinely from making any errors in perpetuity, if he was protected, right, and he's the best, and he says, I'm even a person like you. Sometimes I get mad, sometimes I get angry. Then what do we say for leaders that make mistakes? Again, we should hold them accountable, but we also need to hold what we put faith in into accountability as well, and to fact check, am I believing in God or am I believing in God's creation? Because this creates certain negative effects. The other part that I want to get to in the second khutbah is how out of this, creating this two-dimensional space, there's basically only the perfect person and the munafiq, it has created an attitude where even amongst ourselves, we despise religiosity, right? If a woman wears hijab, if her brother goes the beard, or if a person goes to the masjid with any regularity, it's all automatically, oh, look at these people showing off. We have developed a very hostile attitude towards expressions of religiosity in our community, where the assumption is, this cannot be sincere. or we're just waiting for that person to make a mistake and we go, aha, see, you're really just a hypocrite. You're really just a munafiq. This spirit is not going to work very well at developing a community and developing a next generation that is going to feel that they really have a shot at this thing. It's not going to work very effective in our da'wah of calling people to Islam, which is not about calling them to how they dress and some of these other things, but really calling them, right, you have a shot at redemption. This is what human beings are always looking for. That's why even in this non-Muslim culture, look at all of the stories in the movies, like 95% of them, it's always some story of redemption. I mean, you look at Star Wars, there's something that's kind of funny in Star Wars, is what? It's about redemption. A guy that was good, then became bad, then becomes good again. And we see every story is people here are looking for a story that is about redemption, except that these are all fantasies. We actually happen to have one that is true. So we ask Allah Ta'ala to make us from the people of gentleness, make us from the people of love, and make us for people of the truth that we worship Him and nothing else. ليس كمثله شيء. أولا نسأل الله بالعافية. ربنا اغفر لنا ذنوبنا وكفر عنا سيئاتنا. استغفر الله استغفر الله استغفر الله. الحمد لله حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه والصلوات والسلام على نبيه الشريف وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. So I want to relate to you briefly a hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ, of course, and many of you will know this hadith, and he says, وَلَا يَدْخُلُ الْجَنَّةَ مِنْ كَانَ فِي قَلْبِهِ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ مِنْ كِبْرٍ. Right? None of you will enter into paradise if your heart contains even a little grain of kibr. Now, we often translate the word kibr as pride or arrogance. But the beautiful, there's a temptation to just simply leave it at that. To leave it at pride or arrogance as the translation. The beautiful part about this hadith is that the Prophet ﷺ is actually then at the end of it, he contextualizes what he means by the word kibr, that gives us an insight again to what psychology and behavior, very important, so that we can see how to affect change. So of course, after saying this, what قال الرجل إن الرجل يحب أن يكون ثوبا, right? There's a man that's in the presence of the Prophet ﷺ that hears this and says, well, wait a minute, does this apply to a person that maybe he likes to wear nice clothes? Is this considered to be arrogance or being kibr? Is this an example of kibr? And the Prophet ﷺ, he says, no. He says what? قال إن الله جميل ويحب الجمال. We all know this, right? God is beauty and He loves expressions of beauty, but He continues by saying what? الكبر بطر الحق وغمط الناس, right? That kibr is what? One, it's a sort of denial of the truth, but more importantly, it also goes committed with what? غمط الناس, right? Despising people. And this is what I was talking about a moment ago. A person commits a sin, now we despise them for committing the sin. This is not getting into, hate the sin and not the sinner. No, because clearly the Prophet ﷺ, never articulated this kind of fortune cookie, nonsense. But at the same time, he's saying what? Pride isn't simply, acting in just some abstract way. It's what? That you deny the truth. And one of the truth is what? Inna Allah yaghfiru dhunuba jami'an. Right? One of the truths is Allah forgives all sins except for shirk. But essentially all the major sins that we will commit, Allah says what? I can forgive these. That's a truth. So kibr is not, as he said, it's not looking nice. Sometimes we see a person and say, oh, look at her she's wearing this hijab. What's wrong with that? And this is not about, going on and on about hijab, but why is it that we feel deficient if we see a person with an outward expression? We assume that any outward expression of the religion has to be hypocritical. Where is this coming from? Part of this is we have been indoctrinated into some of the sensibilities of this part of the world that really prefer for religion to stay in the closet. And one of the detriments of us buying into this is that by and large the state and things that can take control of state apparatus like corporations, right? They can wreak havoc on the environment, and now there's no secondary voice that can come and criticize these things or come with an ethics or a morale, right? If we're all just keeping it in the closet, where is how do we bring our morals and our ethics into the public realm of not forcing people to believe what we believe, but to bring about good and to contribute to society, with the genius that is from us. But it also is going back to the hadith, what is this ghamtun nas, this despising people? And far too many of us have an attitude of despising our fellow brothers and sisters. Matter of fact, we will go to many lengths often to accept non-Muslims in their mistakes and their things because we have lost a belief in intrinsic value of believing in La ilaha illallah. Now it's become very utilitarian. What do I mean by this? Well, if you really believe in Allah, why isn't everything perfect? If that's the case, then why didn't democracy, why did it allow slavery? Why did it obliterate all the indigenous peoples of this land? Why has it waged wars non-stop across the globe? We have a political issue going on now about how the Russians colluded with America. How many, just in Africa alone, how many presidents and other people have we assassinated and governments we've changed, right? And yet, when it comes to the Muslim world, we're extremely critical. But when it comes to America, we tend to say, well, perhaps it's because we live a more comfortable life here. But it really shows how we've been compromised. And if we really have a spirit of critique, then it should at least be even across the board. But I'm saying this because it really shows the truth of the analysis of the Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that part of this pride in the heart, part of this arrogance will manifest in an unhappiness at the manifestation of the truth, but also just a sort of despising of people. And again, we should always hold each other, especially ourselves, to accountability. We should be people for justice. We should not allow people that commit, sins, or not so much sins, but commit, crimes to go without accountability, right? We should have standards. But we should not also change the psychological message of the Quran, which to the creation, Allah Ta'ala says to the Prophet, قُلْ يَا عِبَادِيَ الَّذِينَ أَسْرَفُوا عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ لَا تَقْنَطُوا مِنْ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ. Say to them, Muhammad, say to the people that thought, maybe I really can't do this thing. I believe, but I feel like I'm a hypocrite. I've done things, but I don't feel Allah will forgive me. He says, no, say to my slaves that have wronged themselves, don't despair of the mercy of Allah. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَغْفِرُ ذُنُوبَ جَمِيعًا إِنَّهُ هُوَ الْغَفُورُ الرَّحِيمُ. And then the advice, Allah Ta'ala even then gives us the methodology. How do we deal with friends, family, leadership, whatever, that do something wrong? How do we deal with it? What is Allah's advice? Allah says, "What anibu ila rabbikum." Turn back to your Lord. That should be the first step, not crushing people into a two-dimensional space of where they can't be human, that will sometimes make mistakes and sometimes make major sins. Right? Anibu ila rabbikum. Right? Wa aslimu lahu. And what? Submit. Go back to submission. Part of our advice for ourselves and for other people. Turn back to God and resubmit again. Before punishment comes to you, what? And because when that comes, I can't help you, nobody will be able to help you. Right? 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 And follow the beautiful guidance that has come to you from God. Right? Right? And again, وَمِنْ قَبْلِ آيَاتِكُمُ الْعَذَابِ بَغْتَةً وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَشْعُرُونَ. Right? Because the punishment may also come upon you suddenly. That should be something for the warner and the one being warned that should give the heart some pause. Right? Before the punishment becomes upon you suddenly, and you won't even realize it. And I end with this. For the people that see people committing sins and, oh, look at this person's a munafiq, time out. The Prophet ﷺ said what? Shafa'ati. My ability to intercede on the day of judgment. La shu'andu illa bi'idhnih. In Surah Ayatul Kursi, Allah Ta'ala says what? Nobody can intercede except for upon my behalf. So the Prophet ﷺ says, well, on the day of judgment, I will be allowed to intercede on the behalf of my ummah. which shows that there is something special, not intercede on behalf of people, but on behalf of Muslims. So there is something intrinsic and good to being Muslim, not just being like everybody else. There are some country club benefits. What is it? Shafa'ati li ahli al-kaba'i min ummati. Right? He said, my ability to intercede between them and God and the punishment to take them out of the fire to Jannah will be for the kaba'ir, for the people that committed the major sins of my ummah. So before we go and destroy somebody's chance at redemption because they made a mistake, consider this from your prophet that you claim to also believe in. Consider this, that he says, the mercy that Allah has set aside specifically that I can intercede upon my community will not just be for the do-gooders, it'll be for the people that committed the major sins, al-kaba'ir, right? Min ummati, from my ummah. So inshallah we ask Allah Ta'ala to give us fahm, comprehension, and to give us compassion of dealing with one another, to hold ourselves to a higher standard, but in doing so, we still are al-amru bil ma'ruf. We encourage each other to the good, wa nahy anil munkar. We do prohibit the bad, but do so in a spirit that gives people always a chance that Allah Ta'ala will forgive them and that they can have good in this life, well, good in the next one.